And it is the Idaho murders, and we've heard the impact statements. Well, the sentencing has taken place, and it is 4 life sentences. Let's just have a listen to what has happened in court.
I hereby sentence Mr. Kohberger as follows. On count 1, burglary, 10 years fixed, 0 years indeterminate. I also impose a fine of $50,000. Count 2, first-degree murder of Madison Mogan. I sentence the defendant to a fixed term of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, a fine of $50,000, and a civil penalty of $5,000 payable to the family of the victim. On count 3, for first-degree murder of Kaylee Gonsalves, I sentence the defendant to a fixed term of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, a fine of $50,000, and a civil penalty of $5,000 payable to the victim of the family, or to the family of the victim, pardon me. On count 4, for the first-degree murder of Xana Kernodle, I sentence the defendant to a fixed term of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, a fine of $50,000, and a civil penalty of $5,000 payable to the family of the victim. On count 5, for the first-degree murder of Ethan Chapin, I sentence the defendant to a fixed term of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, a fine of $50,000, and a civil penalty of $5,000 payable to the family of the victim. The sentences on counts 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 shall run consecutively to one another. Restitution will be left open for 60 days. Defendant will be required to submit a DNA sample and a right thumbprint impression to the Department of Corrections and comply with the DNA Database Act. I remand the defendant to the custody of the Idaho State Board of Corrections for to be imprisoned in an appropriate facility in execution of the sentence where he will remain until he dies. Though you have waived your right to appeal, you do have a right to file a notice of appeal, and any such appeal must be filed within 42 days of the date of the written judgment, which will be entered shortly hereafter. Though the appeal, you should be aware, may be deemed a violation of the plea agreement, and so I certainly suggest you discuss that with counsel if that is your desire. I ask the media and public present to allow the families to be escorted out first before they leave. Again, thank you to everyone for your stories today. I am strengthened by them, and I am encouraged by your humanity and strength, and God bless you. We're adjourned.
Well, there we are. That is Bryan Kohberger, a 30-year-old former criminal justice student who murdered 4 students in their rented accommodation in Moscow in Idaho in November 2022. Well, he has been sentenced, as you heard there, sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole for those deaths. The family, some of the families are speaking. Let's just have a listen.
Steve, you turned the podium at one point. Talk to us about why you wanted to stare at him.
Well, because he's a coward. He's been protected by the court from day one, the minute that he was arrested. So I wanted to let him know that I was directing everything towards him, and his days of being protected are coming to an end. From what I've been explained, he gets on a van today, and he's got like 12-minute ride, and then he'll be the responsibility of Idaho State.
Were you planning on turning the podium though, or did you do that?
I remember reading it saying "do not move," so I was like, well, I'm moving this. I just kind of made that decision right then and there. So, I want to make it as difficult as possible. I knew my daughter was going to do a speech, and I'd heard it, and I was like, he's going to hate this. He's going to hate this next set of people that are going to come forward and really rip into him and really expose him for what kind of a piece of trash he was. And we've been waiting a long time to say some of those things that needed to be said.
Stephen, you chose not to speak.
I'd written up a statement. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe this is where you do it.
Okay. Well, allow me a second.
Maybe it wasn't court appropriate.
Yeah, it definitely wasn't. Yeah, my name's Steve Gonzalez. I'm Kaylee's older brother. She was my little sister, my friend, the middle child in the heart of our family. There are no words that can fully describe her spirit, but if you knew her, you knew joy, you knew light, you knew someone who made everything better just by being in the room. My statement was largely grounded in one goal, and that was to do everything for anyone who listens to this and has to go through something similar, to not have to endure what we had. My family's fought tirelessly, not just for answers, but for accountability. We've stood in front of cameras, behind closed doors, and across from people who didn't want us to speak, but we did, and we won't stop now. Across nearly every murder case prosecuted by Bill Thompson, including the killing of University of Idaho football player Eric McMillan, there is a clear and troubling pattern. Families are left feeling unheard, justice is negotiated down through plea deals, and the public is left with unanswered questions. In the McMillan case, charges were reduced from first-degree to second-degree murder, prompting confusion and outrage from the victim's family and community. The same pattern is emerged in the Silas Parks and John Lee cases, both of which prosecuted by Bill Thompson, where capital-eligible crimes were resolved through plea agreements, sidestepping trials and diminishing public accountability. The most egregious of these crimes was the brutal killing of Whitney Parks, a young pregnant woman whose life was taken by her husband, Silas Parks, during a violent domestic assault. Whitney was only 22 years old. Whitney was beaten and strangled in her own home, an act of cruelty that not only ended her life, but also the life of her unborn child. And yet, despite the devastating nature of this crime, Bill Thompson reduced the charges from murder to voluntary manslaughter, ultimately securing a sentence that allowed Parks the possibility of parole after just 5 years. There was no trial, no full accounting of what Whitney endured, no acknowledgement in the legal outcomes of the child she was carrying. For Whitney's family, and for anyone who believes that justice system should speak forcefully for victims, this wasn't justice. It was a deal, and it was like so many others under Thompson's watch. It prioritized expedience over accountability. Now, almost predictably, we find ourselves reliving that pattern in the current case. Despite the magnitude and brutality of the crime, the prosecution chose to accept a plea deal behind closed doors, without trial, without ever consulting our family in any meaningful way. In fact, we learned from the plea deal that had been finalized from an email from the prosecution team. Not in person, not with warning, not with respect. That moment underscored what we feared all along, and that this case was following the same well-worn path toward expedience over justice. Sentencing once again fails to reflect the severity of the act, and the emotional fallout has landed again on the shoulders of the victims' families, who have been left out, unheard, and grieving not just a horrific loss, but a system that continues to bypass them. The through line is undeniable. Whether it's 2004 or 2025, this prosecutional, is that a word? Sorry. Prosecutional approach has consistently abandoned the very approach it is, or the very people it is supposed to protect. The trend you'll notice from Thompson's prosecuted crimes are the following: plea bargains avoiding capital punishment, charge reductions, sentences that misalign with the gravity of the crime, lack of trial due to plea bargains. These aren't just failures in process, they're failures that have real consequences for real people. After reviewing Bill Thompson's history, it's clear our family was never given a fair chance at justice, but this isn't just about a prosecutor's record. It's about Kaylee. It's about my sister. She's not just one of the Idaho 4.